sure, on lots of issues. Hopefully we do come to closure today. Before we start, as usual, I'm going to turn this over to Maggie Martin to go over the webinar logistics.
Good morning, everyone. This is Maggie Martin. I'm a management plan specialist here at ADWR, and I'm going to be going over the webinar logistics. Please remain muted unless you are speaking. If you would like to speak, please type your name in the chat, or if you prefer, you can type your comments and questions into the chat, and we will read those aloud instead. Please make sure you send your messages to everyone in the chat so that they do not get missed. If you have any technical difficulties throughout the meeting, you can contact the ADWR Help Desk. Their phone number and email are here on the screen. And lastly, this meeting and chat will be recorded.
Thanks, Maggie. Go to the next slide. Here's our agenda. We're in agenda item number 1. I am going to keep the introductory comments short and turn it over to Sharon Riggins for opening remarks by the chairman, plus into item number 2 when he's ready. So, Sharon Riggins, the ball is now in your court.
Good morning, Director Wachowski and all the participants at the meeting today. If we could, to begin this with, we are here today to discuss what the director has mentioned, and I hope myself will be our last view at a completed red line version of the Appendix 4B Best Management Practice Program practices and point sheets. So it would probably be a good idea if we can get that final red line version up on the screen. And that is the title page. And if we could go to the top of page 4-2. We see there are some, most of what is on here now in red line. I know that isn't correct. What we're going to see some places in red line, and I'm going to do the best I can to identify them, are things that the department has worked on since our last meeting. Most of them are clarification issues. You'll notice that we have right at the very top of the page, we now have an identifier that what we're looking at is section 1 of 2 sections. That is only important for when we discuss section 2 at the very back. But so we have derivated this into 2 different sections now. There was discussion last time concerning a little bit of definitional differentiation on BMP 1.1. It's not now a concrete line ditch, it's a line ditch. And the department and discussion that happened at the last BMP meeting stuck in the concept of well-maintained. This is any lining material that performs at least equivalently to a well-maintained concrete ditch lining. I don't believe there was anybody that had any difficulties with that concept. I certainly don't. As I have done in other BMP meetings, I will stop at the end of each one of these categories and ask if anybody has any comments that they would like to make before we move on. The only other change, well, there's actually 2 more changes. The substitute practice was inserted in here. It didn't used to be in category 1. It is exactly the same as the substitute practices that used to be in category 3 and 4. It has been rewritten to a certain extent in ways to more quantify how, or I should say qualify, how it would work in practice. And I believe the verbiage that the department came up in this particular substitute practice is a good one. I believe it gets to the point of how the group wanted to see substitute practices reviewed and potentially incorporated in the future. So again, I think that this is exactly as we spoke to, and I believe it very well reflects what we were trying to get done. The last item to change on this page, category 1, is at the bottom of the point value determination. It used to require one of these points to be in the BMPs. We have now said that it will require 3. We discussed this also at our last BMP meeting. If you will look at the category 1 points table, if we could get all of that on the screen, you'll notice that essentially what this means is that to get 3 points, a whole 3 points, 85% of the irrigation acreage served will have to be served by either line ditches, pipelines, or drainback systems. That is a high standard, but we think that is a very doable standard and should be a required standard. So the regulated community has actually forwarded the concept that we have a higher number here to reflect what should be done with conveyance systems. So that is actually all we have on conveyance systems. And so I will ask at this point in time if anybody would like to make any comments concerning the red lines that we've discussed at this time. There doesn't seem to be anybody. So we will go ahead and move on now to category 2. Whoop. We just got somebody. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Brad Strader has commented, who determines if a line ditch is well maintained? That's pretty subjective.
More than happy to answer that. This entire document, in many places, uses certain generalities because to get a definition of well-maintained in this, there is a potential that that definition of well-maintained could be a page of definition. To get it specific and exactly what it is would be a high bar to raise in this document. Other places, we have also done the same concept of using generalized concepts within a BMP. I guess what we would get down to for the people that are worried about not having an absolutely specific definition is if they will at some point in time be said, well, your ditch isn't maintained well enough. I would offer to say right now that if a ditch is maintained well enough to where it has no more leakage through it than a new ditch does with its expansion joints that have a certain amount of leakage by definition. If you have a ditch fairly well patched up, it might not be pretty, but it still can be quite sealed. I don't think the necessity of taking that further is here. If it ever got to the point to where it had to be argued, that's why we have a BMP committee to sit down and talk about those things. I don't believe it's a problem. To move on to the next question I see here in chat, yes, go right ahead, Director Buchowski.
So I just want to say that while the well-maintained is a general language, I think it's a good thing to have flexibility in that regard. If we spend the one page to define this, what well-maintained is, it's going to be somebody coming to the director at that time, and it's going to be kind of yes or no. You're either meeting that standard or you're not, and there's no wiggle room, there's no extenuating circumstances, there's no ability to work out something with the applicant in that regard. And I think that is not a good place for any of us to be. I know what a poorly maintained line canal might be, because I often walk along the Highline Canal in my house in Ahwatukee, and slabs of concrete are coming off the sides and things like that. So I know what that looks like, but it is a pretty wide range, and I think it is a good thing that we maintain the flexibility. And as you said, we do have this committee help out in that regard if we get into a situation where perhaps the decision by the director at the time is one that is concerning to the agricultural community and to this BMP committee.
Very good. Thank you, Director Machowski. The next question that I see here, let's go back up a question on chat. I guess I can make that happen. There we are. There was a question asked. Whoa, let me find it. There we are. The question was asked, how do you calculate the percentage of the irrigated acreage served? I'm glad that question was asked because it's done the same in category 1 and in category 2. The way this is done is you take the total irrigated acreage of a BMP farm unit and you calculate how much of that acreage is served by concrete line ditch pipelines or drain back systems. That would make the percentage divided by 100 that gives you your percentage of farms irrigation acreage served. So if you had a 1,000-acre farm and you had 90% of that acreage served by lined and improved systems, that would be 90%. If you had 800 acres served, it would be 80%. The exact same situation is presented in category 2. The difference with category 2 is there's a lot of different potential BMPs in that with different points. So in that circumstance, you may have 25% with a 3-point, you might have 45% with a 4-point, you can have various things there. But that is the way you come to it. In these two, it is a percentage of the whole that in conveyances it's being served, or if in systems, it is present on the acreage. That's how we come up with the percentages that are used to calculate the points. I saw a
Chairman Riggins, if I could jump in really quickly.
certainly.
I just wanted to point out that there is language regarding that estimation or calculation. Amanda has it highlighted here on the screen, so I just wanted to point out that that is detailed in the document.
Okay, thank you. That is exactly where it is. On down to the question that was asked, I assume from Brian Betcher. It says point value went from 1 to 3. Would a minimum point value of 2 be sufficient? That still requires over 75% of the farm to be covered. There are, to answer that question from a philosophical point of view, when I got into farming and I went through the University of Arizona before that in the mid-70s, one of the absolute first places recognized in irrigation agriculture to conserve water that was being wasted needlessly, and indeed the irrigation districts, many of them found very early that lining systems was very important to not have amazing losses, because there can be very, very high losses that come from unlined irrigation systems conveying water. I would say that it is no high lift at all to say that to be in the BMP, 85% of a farm's acreage needs to be served by an improved system. I believe that's something that we should impose upon ourselves. And I don't believe, in all fairness, that any, or at least incredibly few, BMP farms would be subject to a problem with that, because they've already got themselves up to high efficiency. And most farms that I've ever been on that are BMP farms, they've gotten to 100% conveyance improvements a long time ago. So I would say that no, I would say that the 3 points is a good requirement and shows that we are willing to require a lot of ourselves for this optional program. Any other questions? Okay, we will move on to section 2, or category 2 rather. Again, we see on this page that all of our approved best management practices and points are all part of section 1. So that's why we see a red line there. When we move down to BMP 2.7, I do not believe, as I have read it, that there is any changes in it from the last time we spoke to it. These were, has actually been BMP 2.7, I believe, has been through 2 meetings now, to where this red line has generally been agreed upon how it is written. BMP 2.8, I believe that, again, since last meeting, now it wasn't 2 meetings for it, but last meeting, I believe that this verbiage in the red line in BMP 2.8 was agreed to at that BMP meeting of 2 weeks ago. So I don't think there's anything new here that we're discussing. What has been in BMP, the new BMP 2.9 has been through several meetings. The new 2.10 has been through several meetings. The new 2.11 and 2.12 have also been through several meetings. So I see nothing in those that has not already been vetted. Of course, if anybody at the end of the conversation on category 2 wishes to talk about it, I think that is entirely appropriate. We have gotten down, also, there is a new substitute practice for farm irrigation systems that has been put into category 2. It didn't have one prior. It lives in the same concept as the one that was in category 1. A little bit of a difference in this one, as it is written, is not only does it allow for a new or existing farm irrigation system definition, but it also allows for a different remedy for a BMP that's in a minimum qualifying condition. Those things are enumerated here, and I think it's good that they're enumerated, because it'll give the director at a time in the future more direction to understand what was thought of here and how this will work. This particular substitute practice is showing that it can be anywhere from 1 to 4 points. And that also is appropriate, because if an entirely new system comes up and is identified that is equivalent or better than things that we're doing already, then indeed they should rank the same as a very efficient, fully developed system as we've already had on the BMPs. Exactly where an entirely new system that no one has ever thought of is going to come from at this time is hard to consider, but we live in a world of technological change, so having a keeper here that potentially can be used, I think is a good decision. Other than that, the substitute farm irrigation systems very much is aligned with what we've already discussed as in the same place in category 1. We also see that in category 2, if we can move down just a slight bit. In category 2, we have kept the minimum number of points required to be in the BMP program at 2. That is what it's been before. It's actually what it's been always. And I'll leave that at that. I could get into a large discussion of why it's been left at 2, and if someone wishes to do so, I will have that discussion. But up to this point in time, that's where that has settled. So if we have any discussions that we wish to have on category 2 and any points settled or new, this would be the time for us to have a discussion of it.
Chairman Regan, this is Director Shofsky. I just wanted to make everyone aware that we at the ADR are good with the point spread and the substitute practice. I'm not sure if we had closed that loop the last time, but we are good with the 4-point spread.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think that is a good way to list it for that. So I'm glad we all saw how that could potentially work in the future. Any other questions from anybody participating? Okay. None being, we will move on. And let me say one thing also, before we go from this point. When we get done with our discussion here, if somebody has a burning question they want to ask that they missed in any one of these categories, they are more than welcome to bring that up at the end. I'm just trying to get through this in such a way that we know pretty much where we are. But this is a consensus product, and if there's anything that really needs to be brought up, it can also be brought up at the end. So we will move on now to category 3, which is irrigation water management practices. In category 3, 3.1 was changed quite a long time ago, just to reflect the reality that a lot of people don't level with lasers anymore. They use GPS. So that was a technical correction. The low pressure sprinkler system annual maintenance program, BMP 3.2, that again has been through at least 2 meetings and has remained in the fashion it is now. BMP 3.3, it had some changes up through last meeting, and the department went ahead and added a little bit more to that since our last meeting. And it gets into the concept that there could be situations where drip tapes had longer lives due to various practices that were being demonstrated or were being used to prolong their lives, to where potentially the 10-year beginning could be set back by the director if it was shown to him that the system was still delivering at least 90% of its original design gallons per minute flow in a uniform fashion. I believe this is a very good addition that the department has put in here. It recognizes that initial or active initiative by various producers to show what some of their technologies can do and provide that to change some of these BMPs over time is a very good structure for us to install in this BMP program, be helpful in the future. So the additional paragraph that the department stuck in on the bottom of 3.3, I think is a very welcome addition and well thought through. as we keep going through BMPs.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Director Chosky.
I don't know if Dan Thielander is on, but I just want to thank him. Dan spent a lot of time with our staff, helping us with the concepts and the language in 3.3. So I just want to express my appreciation to him for taking that time to do that with us.
Thank you very much, Director. Product we're all trying to get completed here is the fact that truly a great number of people have been involved in it. Lots of incredible experience and professionalism has been delivered to get us to this point. And if I did not know that Mr. Thielander helped the department with that particular paragraph, but I concur with it, and I'm glad he joined in at this point to help with it. As we move down in furthering in category 3, in the new BMP 3.6, the concept of border angling with angled rows and contour farming was inserted many meetings ago, and has seemed to not have anybody that had further discussion on it for quite some time. And the last addition that we put in, again, was almost from the very beginning, where the suggestion is there's other computer-based modeling referencing BMP 3.14 than ASMET. And I believe that was a good addition in there for a technical aspect that has changed. 15 years ago, there wasn't nearly as many different services that can provide that. Now there's many. The last thing that has been changed in category 3, or no, second to the last thing that's been changed, is the substitute practice description that always existed in category 3 has now been conformed more along the lines of how the new substitute practices were in section 1 and 2. Now there is a difference how this one is written, because category 3 and category 4 are actually points on an entire BMP as opposed to percentage of points. So it's not exactly the same in its wordage, but it's different because of the fact that 3 and 4 amass points differently than 1 and 2, but it conforms to how the director will deal with substitute practices in the future. I believe the wordage in it is well done and conforms well. The last change in category 3 is that prior there was only a necessity of having a minimum number of 1 point in these categories. The regulated community has stepped up and said, no, we feel there needs to be more than that. So we've suggested taking that up to 2. And to get into this just a little bit, don't want to get into the weeds too much on this. One of the problems with taking either category 3 or category 4 up to 3 points was it had the potential to create more than 12 points being needed in the overall BMP requirement sheet if there were further points in category 1 and 2. It was something that was seen that was not really a good idea to force that to happen. However, to take it up 100% from 1 to 2 is something that the regulated community thinks is a very good idea and shows our commitment to furthering the efficiencies and conservation that will be generated through our new take on the BMP system practices and points. So do we have any questions or comments here on category 3?
Chairman Riggins, I'll back up here. Brad Strader commented, I appreciate the increase in points for the level and near level systems. It accurately recognizes the efforts by farmers to be more efficient with their water use. Thank you. Also a comment, Michael Caparasso would like to speak. Mike, you're welcome to unmute yourself.
Good morning, everyone. Chairman Riggins, I have a comment on the new BMP 3.1, but before I get into that comment, I just wanted to, I'm missing the last meeting, which I regret, because looking at the video of that meeting, it was an excellent meeting, and the corrections and changes that were made by the department, by you, by the stakeholders, by all the comments that have rolled into this new BMP revision is very commendable. I'm just totally thrilled with the way it has progressed and evolved over the last few months. And with that, now that I have the stage, I just wanted to make that comment of my support for these changes. And anyway, if we can get up to 3.1 and allow me to put my glasses on and read my recommendations, there's a little bit of a wordsmithing that I'd like to do. I'm sorry, let's call that 3.10, if we can roll down to that.
Okay.
All right, now participation in a consultant or irrigation district sponsored irrigation scheduling service, which is excellent. I'd like to see a little more consistency between the definition and the title. And instead of enrollment, I'd like to see that change to participation, if that doesn't have any heartburn with anyone. I would also like to add, I put in participation in a consultant, irrigation district, ADWR sponsored, or other irrigation scheduling service approved by the ADWR director. Because there's a lot of services out there from different agencies. I know USDA provides some, even though USDA provides one that the ADWR does sponsor. There may be other things in the future that we're not quite aware of yet that may come into this role of irrigation water management category. And I'm just making that recommendation and wanting to see if there's any heartburn with that simple edit.
Mike, I'll jump in on that. The word enrollment, when the title specifies participation, I do believe myself that participation is a better way to describe it. The last sentence ties back into that concept, and the last sentence states, must participate in such a program through the entire crop season annually. So participate, I do believe, is a better word. I don't know so much if we're not including pretty much anyone when we say, and I also believe it would be participation with, not in, a consultant. But when you say participation with a consultant or ADWR sponsored irrigation scheduling service, I don't know how you're leaving anybody out, because a consultant can be a private individual. It can be an employee that works for an irrigation district. It could be almost anybody that you could consider. Obviously, ADWR sponsored irrigation scheduling service is IMS, or its equivalent up in the Phoenix AMA. But I would have no trouble whatsoever changing enrollment into participation with. But do you really think that we need anything further than that?
Well, I'd like to hear from someone else that might have some input on this, but I personally think that if ADWR sponsored irrigation scheduling service basically would attribute or include any other service that comes to the table for that farming operation, that would be acceptable. There's a lot.
Again, we get into some definitional issues here that I think we need to understand that we expand the way that we have to describe this BMB substantially if we try to throw too many things in that, when in the BMP itself, it states that the consultant or the service must provide recommendations on certain things, them being soil moisture monitoring, soil water replacement needs, irrigation application rates, and irrigation scheduling dates. It needs to be based on soil moisture monitoring and real-time evapotranspiration data. So as far as who can be in this, if a consultant does all of these things and there's paperwork to back it up that they have, then there is no certification for these consultants. It's somebody that's in the business. So I hate to pin it down in the opening of the BMP that since we've said what needs to be done, I believe saying that it's a consultant that provides this, or the IMS and the program in Phoenix, they're the ones that will be attached to this and having to provide this in this fashion. So I don't know why you want to get more specific in who it
Okay.
is that's going.
I don't want to get too hung up on this, Scott, but let me just give you an example. The ADWR sponsored irrigation scheduling programs and services, and every AMA is based on a grant. Basically, it's funded by ADWR through the groundwater withdrawal fees or whatever mechanisms they use for that now. And that's great. Now, let's say the Bureau of Reclamation all of a sudden gets a windfall of money and they want to get into this this grant program that provides the same type of scheduling service, either funneled through their agency or some other mechanism. Is that covered? Is that okay? Does that,
What,
does that
what,
act?
Mike, would they not be a consultant?
Would you-
Indeed, I would suggest that ADWR sponsored irrigation scheduling service was stuck in there because IMS is seen as something that works with the BMPs. They do inspections, they help people with worksheets, they do various things. So IMS was stuck in this BMP because of the special place that they occupy. But everybody and anybody else, be they paragovernmental, be they governmental, be they private sector, they would be a consultant. If they're consulting with these specific concepts, then that BMP, its requirements are served.
Okay, if you are defining consultant then as anyone providing services, not necessarily just a private sector, I'm okay with it. You know, I just didn't want to see anybody, any program out there that might come up in the future excluded because of the tight language that I'm interpreting this as. So that's just my point. Like I said, I'm not going to get too hung up on it. I think it's worked fine in the past. It'll probably work great in the future. But that was my point, and I just wanted to see if it was valid amongst any other participants here, if there's any other concerns. Otherwise, just let's move on.
Very good, sir. I believe a good opinion to seek at this point in time would be to ask the director what his thoughts are on the verbiage in 3.10.
That'd be great.
So, Mr. Chairman, I would suggest that this works to address Mike's concern and doesn't cause heartburn for folks. You could put a private or governmental consultant. I think that would cover every possible organization, governmental organization that might fund such a project out in the future and allow, obviously, the private consultant sector to provide that service as well. Does that work?
That is an excellent recommendation from my perspective. Yes.
And if the director likes that language, and Mike, if you like that language, I certainly have no problems with it whatsoever. And if we want at this point, go ahead and have whoever is controlling this document redline that in. I think that would be entirely appropriate.
Excellent.
Mr. Chairman, that's DWR, we'll add that in there. Hearing no, not seeing any other folks on this, in this meeting asking to speak or raising a question about that language.
Okay,
We'll update
Great.
Chairman Riggins and we'll put that online.
okay, perfect. Very
Simple
good.
solution. A long way around to get there, but it was a very good recommendation. Thank you.
There we are. Very good. Thank you, Mike.
Sure thing.
Any other questions by anybody that they would like to bring up or comments in category 3? Seems to not be any, so we will move on to category 4. Category 4,
Mr. Chairman, sorry.
remain, yes, Director Pachowski.
One of my folks pointed out what I think is a conforming change in 3.9. Currently, it says enrollment in a private or DWR sponsored educational irrigation program, blah, blah, blah. We could also add governmental, private governmental or ADWR to make that conform with what we are changing in 310 if that is okay.
I think the observation that those two should conform in that fashion is a very good one, and I would agree with that entirely.
Shall be done.
And thank you for that observation. Okay, our first change that occurred in category 4 was in BMP 4.8. That has been through several meetings. I assume that it has been well vetted by everyone. 4.9 has been in since the last meeting. It has been discussed. I believe it has been vetted. 4.10, there's been quite a bit of discuss on that one, polyacrylamide. There's been so much discussion on that one, I finally learned how to pronounce it. I was having difficulty with it at the beginning, but I can say it now, polyacrylamide. And we also, in the BMP category 4s, the substitute practice has been refined just as it was done in category 3 to conform to the concepts of how the director would, the process that he would use as when a substitute practice was presented. This conforms with the other substitute practice descriptions that we've gone through. And I believe it's done in a very good way and conforms with the rest of the document. In category 4, as we did in category 3, we have encouraged, and it has been recorded here, that we take the minimum number of points required in category 2, or pardon me, in category 4, up to 2 points from 1. Again, showing a commitment to further efficiencies and conservation by the people applying through the optional program of the BMPs. At this point, is there any discussion on category 4 in general, category 4, the changes? Anything that anybody like to chat about in category 4? Very good. Seems like we can move on. The final thing that we have on our document, the document, as I mentioned at the very beginning, has been divided into 2 sections, a section 1 and a section 2. Section 2 is new. And in our discussions, actually, in the last two BMP meetings, we have discussed that we have implied in certain places how these substitute practices, BMPs, would work, but we hadn't really fully described it. And the department has taken on the job of describing that. This is in for us to see at this point in time. And I believe they've done an excellent job in capturing the discussions that we put into this. I believe this section 2, defining how when someone comes up with a substitute practice that wishes it to be heard and go forward with it, now we have a procedure that we have qualified. So I totally concur with the way that this has been written, and I am glad for its inclusion. And now I will say that we can discuss this section 2 if anybody wishes to discuss it, or if somebody has anything they want to discuss through the entire conversation we've just had in looking at these practices. This would be a good time to bring it up, because I hope we're moving towards a consensus decision, and we're going to start deciding to finalize things. So this would be a good time to bring things up if there's a desire for discussion. It seems like we don't have anything coming in that is desired. I would like to take just a moment at this time and thank everybody that's been in this process. Thank the department. Thank the director personally. We have created something, I believe, through consensus, that is a much better product than it was before. I believe that it'll serve the needs of the regulated community and also serve the needs of showing that agriculture is willing to impose further efficiency and conservation requirements upon itself to go forward. I'm hoping we can go ahead today and call this a finished document and send it on to the ag subgroup for a final ratification with the department. And have our last thing to do is deciding when the next time the BMP committee is going to meet. And with that, I will turn it over to the director for any discussion points he has, comments, or any direction he wishes to proceed.
So, Mr. Chairman, I do have some comments, but perhaps first we should pull up the slide that looks at minimum, maximum, and total points. So I don't know, Mr. Chairman, if you want to make any comments on this slide. I think we thought the last time more or less closed the loop on this slide, and I know you referred to some of
Yes,
these
sir.
into the document, but I want to just, as part of the whole package, close on this as well before we close on the practices and points.
Thank you, Director Husky. Yes, I will definitely talk a bit about what we have done with minimum points required. We have, in virtually all instances here, in category 1, quite substantially decided that the BMP program, in its optional capacity, being chosen by operators to be outside of the base program and be into a program that allows some flexibility, but in doing so, it requires a much larger degree of verifiable conservation and efficiency programs. In moving on into the future, into the 5th management plan, it was entirely proper to take these categories and have further minimum points required. I believe that the quite large increase of water conveyance system improvements reflects a very long-standing and understood concept that there can be a lot of water loss through unlined systems, and we really need to have that almost entirely being done. It needs to be pretty complete. A lot of water lost in a dirt ditch. So the regulated community totally agrees with a furtherance of points. Irrigation, water management, and agronomic management systems. There is no reason that furtherance of points was also not required there. Even though someone might have a large number of points in other categories, they still should have at least 2 points in either of these two categories. These are things that all lead to greater efficiencies and indeed the prolongation of the economic realities of agriculture in Arizona. So the fact that the agricultural and regulated community actually desires these to be included in our new BMP fifth management proposal reflects totally that we acknowledge that we want to do a very good job. The total points requirement of 12 means that we have taken from the third management plan and required there to be 20% more points than used to be. That is a requirement that we are glad to meet because it again shows we are desirous of making it showing that we are committed to having very efficient systems to go forward in Arizona, both from an economic point of view and also a regulatory point of view, that we are doing our part. The total points of 12 is agreed upon by the regulated community. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it back to you, Director Pachowski.
I will say, Mr. Chair, that the department is also in support of the information on this slide, the minimum max total points required. And I will also say, collectively, building on your earlier comments, that from my perspective, the BMP practices and points document, as well as the minimum points required in each category, maximum points required in each category, and the total points requirement collectively reflect an outcome that creates increase in efficiency and conservation that you have alluded to in your remarks as well. So I think that I want to just sum up the department's view of what we have produced together here. I think it's very positive. I want to thank everybody who participated, who's given us input, and you, Mr. Chairman, for your work on this and working so closely with us here at the department and with my staff. I think we have put together really good product that moves the ball forward for the agricultural community.
Thank you very much, Director Pachowski. I see one question here before I go forward. I see that there is the question, is it the department's intent to implement the fifth management plan Ag BMP program in all 5 AMAs? I believe I know the answer to that, but I'm going to defer to the department to answer that question if someone would please grab onto that.
Hi, Chairman Reagan. This is Natalie Nast. I can take that question. So the Ag BMP program does currently exist in all 5 AMAs, although we do only currently have participants in the program in the Phoenix and Pinal AMAs. So these changes will be incorporated into that BMP program for all 5 AMAs. But since it's an optional program, it's up to the ag users in those AMAs whether they would like to join or not.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. If we could we get back onto the screen our meeting agenda? We are still in agenda item 2. We have spoken through the entirety of the BMP Best Management Practices and Points worksheets. We've discussed all the changes up to these points. We have reached a point to where, when asking if there are any further questions or suggestions for alterations, we have found that we are not receiving requests for any more changes or alterations. So I would suggest, as the chairman of the Ag BMP committee, that the regulated community suggests at this point in time that we have reached a consensus, and we would encourage the department to adopt this BMP program as we've all created it at this point in time, and go forward with it as the product that we will insert into the 5th management plan. And with that, I will again turn it over to Chairman Buchowski for comment.
So, Mr. Chairman, you heard my kind of conclusionary statement. We will be taking this package forward and incorporating it into our proposed regulatory program for the 5th management plan, the plural. And then obviously we have to go through the formal process for promulgating and adopting the plan, hearings, etc. I also want to mention that on May 19th, we have scheduled a bigger public agricultural sector work group. We will bring forth this completed package to them as well to close that loop. And if there's anybody that hasn't been participating in this process that's participating in that meeting process, they'll have an opportunity to look at this as well. Just wanted to mention that in terms of the timing. That date, May 19th, will give us some time to write some other things up and things we want to share with that as well. But I also want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the group. We pretty much met a very tight schedule that we all asked you to try to meet, that the department can keep its schedule for the ultimate adoption of these plans. And I want to thank everybody, because I know that meant a lot of work in a very short time frame. It meant folks getting comfortable on the regulated sector side, on BLR side, and honestly working out some good compromises where we had differences of opinion. I just think it shows how well these processes can work. You dig down into the weeds, get together, and hammer these things out collectively. So thank you for that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much for your comments, Director Buchowski. They are very much appreciated. I would suggest at this point in time, we have moved into our 3rd agenda item, which is future meetings. The director has already mentioned our meeting date, which I believe was May 19th, for the larger ag subcommittee group. I imagine that most people have been attending the BMP meetings and have a very good idea of where they will be at that ag subcommittee group, but that is certainly the next step to take this to get it into that arena, to where ag in general has a look at it. And it will be on the DWR website that all of us at these meetings, it will be incumbent upon us to do the best we can to get anybody that's not familiar with it to review these things on the ag website, give it time, ask questions, and try to be prepared as much as possible when we get to the time of the May 19th meeting. Concerning the BMP committee, I will offer an opinion that unless called for a certain task that needs to be rendered at a specific time frame, I would suggest that we postpone a meeting date for the BMP committee until we have a full ratification of its members, until who members have been selected by the governor, and we know who our committee is. And when we have that, even though we have no particular regulatory or efficiency conservation work may be on our plate, I believe the BMP committee should have a meeting and do our organizational and introductions and get ourselves around at that point. And I'll offer that as a suggestion, and again, I'll turn that back to the director to see what his comments are on that.
So, Mr. Chairman, I agree with that suggestion, with one potential change, and that would be if on May 19th, there's something unexpected that occurs or some set of comments that is unexpected that requires this committee to reconvene before the time that you suggested. I think I will reach out to you and have that discussion with you. And again, given the participation in this group, the attention paid with by the agricultural community, I do not expect that outcome to occur from the May 19th meeting.
Thank you very much, Director Buchowski. And indeed, the BMP committee is anxious at any time that it can further the desires and the finishing and completion of our regulatory timelines and tasks at this point in time. I think a fairly short call for meeting could be achieved pretty much any time to go forward to help in any way that came forward. So, and I thank you very much for elaborating on that potential if it was there. So since we do not know when, we will have everyone confirmed that will eventually be sitting on the BMP committee. I would say we can't set a date. We just need to wait and be informed on who the committee members will be. And then when it happens, we will find ourselves a meeting date at that time. And if that is acceptable for everyone at this point in time, I will ask if there is anybody with the department, if there's anybody at the meeting, participants, does anybody at this point have any closing comments that they would like to make at this time?
Mr. Chairman, I see a question came up in the chat, Alex Arboleda, about how much do we have a sense of the timing for the final appointments to be made for the BMP committee. The governor's office, boards and commissions has not really shared with us any detailed plan that would give us a sense of when they might be completed. But we know that they are working on it, that it's in their court. They are well aware of this process, these meetings, et cetera, and the need to get that done. But I don't have a date for you, Alex.
And understand fully, thank you very much for that update, and understand fully. And we seem to have a lot of work in the state right now, and if it takes a little while to get these done, it is understandable with the number of things that are all up for consideration in this day and age, but we have had the very positive and energetic participation by many people that what may eventually become selected BMP committee people, and they've been doing it without knowing whether they are. So I would say that whenever we finally get to that point, it'll just be another step that we've taken, but we've gotten pretty much everything done prior to it being done as well. So if there are no further questions or comments from anyone, I would suggest at this point in time that we go ahead and adjourn the meeting.
Thanks again, Mr. Chairman. We will sign off here at DWR.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman or Director Wachowski, and thank you to all the participants that have been here at the meeting. We'll all get together for the Ag Subcommittee meeting here in another about 5 weeks.
Major thanks.